practice, but he was against it.
Welcome to another episode of The Dawn of Shades. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and today is May 17th, 2011, and this is episode 508. More about this series of programs and the guests that have provided us with such fascinating conversations can be found on our website, www.exogenynetwork.com. The Dawn of Shades always tries to bring interesting people right to the audience to hear about both new and old ideas. We focus on the people, places, and ideas that don't always make the mainstream news, the kinds of things that are frequently labeled as alternative or paranormal. For the show tonight, if you would like to have a question asked, you can email it to me at giascott@exogenynetwork.com. You can also send it through the virtual auditorium on PalTalk via text. I do monitor the email during the program, so if you're listening outside of the virtual auditorium and would like to have a question answered, go ahead and email it to me, and I'll get it asked for you. In the virtual auditorium, just put it in text, and I'll try and catch it as the screen scrolls. And if I don't catch it the first time, feel free to repeat it again. If you are listening in on a podcast, go ahead and email me with your question, too. I will try and get your questions answered for you as well. If you would like to call in and ask your question over the air, you may call us at 504-273-7379. Once again, that number is our call-in number, and it is 504-273-7379. And for those of you who like to feel connected, you can find me on Facebook and Twitter, so you can link to me there. There's also a Dawn of Shades fan page on Facebook, so you can look for that as well. For the readers, campers, and foodies, check out the articles and blogs. You just might find something that might interest you. We have a lot going on this week as we approach another end-of-the-world date. If you haven't been reading everything online, Saturday, May 21st, is supposed to be the end of it all. Seems that a gentleman by the name of Harold Camping has predicted the end of the world, although what his prophecy has been based on, I don't know for sure. But while Mr. Camping has apparently affiliated with fundamentalist Christians, I'm not sure that everyone is as convinced of Mr. Camping's prediction as he is. I'm also not sure how convinced he himself is. One man has challenged him to putting his radio network where his prophecies are, you might say, and to hand over ownership of his radio station on Monday morning following his failed prediction. It seems that quite a few people are not putting much stock in his prophecy. So maybe we've all heard it before. We might get a whole lot more done if we became a little bit more proactive rather than continually waiting for the latest and greatest in end-of-the-world prophecies. Start working on making this world a better world, a kinder world, a cleaner world, and a safer world for everyone. And with all of that planetary brotherliness going around, it's only natural that once again we would turn our eyes to the sky and the idea of visitors from other worlds coming here, and then to the women that study them as we continue our Women of Ufology series this week. This week's guest is one of the many fascinating women of ufology, that growing number that we'd all like to see more of as speakers at conferences and other ufology-related events. Our guest tonight is Barbara Lamb. Barbara, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself to the audience?
I certainly will. I'd be happy to. I want to apologize right away. I have sort of a hoarse voice today, but I'll be happy to do my best. Anyway, I am a licensed psychotherapist for many years, and I live in Claremont, which is in Southern California. I'm also a certified hypnotherapist and regression therapist since about 1984. And in 1991, busily doing regression work along with my regular therapy practice, in 1991, I began to realize that people were beginning to come to me for regression work with very unusual experiences that they've had, experiences of being approached by very unusual beings and sometimes being taken away for an hour or two. And they usually didn't remember very much about those experiences, except maybe the beginning or just the last few moments, and they wanted to find out what happened in between. So anyway, continuing with my background, I was trained in regression therapy by the Association of Past Life or Regression Research and Therapies, which is based in California. And then I became a trainer of other regression therapists for a few years, and I still occasionally train therapists in doing regression work with experiencers of extraterrestrial contact. And along with all of this, I have a support group for experiencers. Some people would call them abductees. And this group began in 1994 and is still going strong today with somewhat different consistency here and there, but we still meet. And I have been leading groups into crop circles for many years now. I've been researching that phenomenon since 1991 also, and I've written a book called Crop Circles Revealed, and that has loads of beautiful pictures and information about this amazing crop circle phenomenon. And then back to the extraterrestrial work. For a few years now, I've been the president of a professional group called the Academy of Clinical Close Encounter Therapists. And this is a group of professional people who are not only psychotherapists, but they're certified hypnotherapists and regression therapists. And all of us in this group do regress people and work with people who've had these unusual encounters with extraterrestrial beings, which certainly most therapists do not work with. So we're kind of a rare group, but we do have members all over the U.S. and even in several other countries. And then continuing on, along this line of work, I'm also a board member and editor for a very interesting online journal called the Journal of Abduction Encounter Research. So we publish articles from many people about many different points of view of the whole extraterrestrial and UFO phenomenon. So very, very interesting materials, very interesting articles. And then one further thing is that I'm teaching a course on varieties of extraterrestrial encounters for an online university. This is the International Metaphysical University, and good for them. They have a department of ufology, and people can and people can get course credits, and they can get a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, and I think eventually they'll have a PhD part of their program too. So that's a wonderful way for people to get an extremely interesting education. So I'll just mention that name again. It's the International Metaphysical University, and that can be found online with a search engine. So that kind of rounds out a lot of what I'm doing. But I think that for our purposes today, Gia, we want to talk mostly about the extraterrestrial encounters. Is that right?
Well, not only about that, I mean, I'm really curious about your work because, as an experiencer myself, you talked about these missing gaps in your memories. Now, I've not gone through regression therapy, but I even get tangled up in the terminology. And I'm sure the listeners are kind of the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
What is really, I mean, you mentioned several different kinds of things, and, like regression therapy and so forth, hypnotherapy, and what. I don't really understand. What is the difference?
Oh, okay, between hypnotherapy and regression therapy?
Right.
Yeah.
Because a lot of us are looking for ways to recover memories, and then we're told about false memory syndrome. And so people kind of when you say hypnotic regression, they're kind of like, I don't know about that. So I think if we understood it better, then it would be less of a boogeyman under the bed.
Well, the basic principle behind this is that our subconscious minds record absolutely everything, every little detail of everything that we experience. So when a person is taken away by visiting beings, as I said earlier, maybe for an hour or 2 hours or so, sometimes even longer, they may not consciously remember what's happened during that time, but the subconscious mind does remember. It's recorded it all. So regression therapy is simply putting someone, or I should say assisting someone, to get into a nice, deep state of relaxation so that they can access their subconscious minds. And when I'm helping somebody to become that nice and deeply relaxed, which usually takes about 15 minutes or so, I mention here and there the focus of the information that we're looking for in that particular regression. So in some cases, somebody might choose a particular incident, let's say when they woke up at night, one particular night, and they saw light coming into the room, which seemed mysterious, and then perhaps saw a couple of beings, unusual beings, not human beings, standing by the bed. And very typically, they find that they can't move, and they can't call out or even nudge somebody who might be sleeping in the bed next to them, and they're sort of paralyzed, in other words. And very often that's very frightening. And then maybe the most that they remember after that, in a typical situation, is they feel that they're being lifted up or levitated up out of the bed, and then perhaps through a solid wall or a closed window in some light, and then usually they don't remember anything after that. So, of course, that can be pretty traumatic, just as is. And they want to know, well, there must have been more to that, because I wasn't aware of anything until a couple of hours later. But so in the regression to that particular kind of incident, I will mention the general date that that incident happened and where they were, and that it was 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever they remember. And this helps the subconscious mind to focus back on that particular incident. And so when we get to the incident, after I count from number 10 down to number 1 to deepen the relaxation, then I say, okay, now you are on that particular night in such and such a place, and it's around 2 o'clock in the morning, and you wake up and you're aware of, I mentioned the clues they've already given me, and then I just say, okay, you be there now as much as you possibly can, relive it as if you're there now, and tell me what's happening. So then you see the regression material unfolds really just moment by moment by moment. And it's not as if they're remembering back and they're telling a story where they already know what's happening in the story. In this case, in regression, they just ease through it, one moment following another moment and another and another, and then the whole picture begins to sort of round out. So they never know what's happening or what's going to happen ahead. They just follow it moment by moment as these awarenesses come to them. And my process is not to suggest any ideas or plant any particular ideas. Definitely no. My part in this is just to say, okay, keep going, and what are you aware of now? And describe what you see, describe what the environment seems to be, and are you there by yourself, or are there others with you? And keep moving, tell me what's happening now, until the whole experience is complete. So it's, again, very different than just telling a story, because it evolves bit by bit by bit, as the person certainly seems to be reliving whatever that event was. And then, after the regression, I bring the person back to normal, awake consciousness. And then before we finish the session, we take some time to debrief it. And I will say, well, how real did that seem to you to be? Because it's not for me to evaluate, it's for that person. And invariably they say, well, there were moments during the regression when I wondered here and there. My conscious mind, which is still functioning to some extent, my conscious mind wondered, could I just be making this up, or could this really be real? But then the other part of the person experiencing the material in the regression would answer to the person, yes, I'm really here, this is really happening. And then afterwards, when we sort of debrief or evaluate the experience, the person usually says, yes, I mean, that just seemed entirely real, and I was feeling these different procedures that were done to me, feeling them as if it was happening now, and I was really feeling the emotions that came up, and they seemed to be very consistent with what was happening. And yes, I would say that this was real, that this really had happened, and now I know about it. Before I didn't. I just knew that something must have happened. So as a regression therapist, it's so important that I am as neutral as possible. And as I said earlier, just, not give any suggestions or any clues, but just let it all emerge from the person being regressed. And then people always ask, here and there anyway, what about false memories? Because we know there is such a thing as a false memory syndrome.
Right.
And we do have to watch out for that. Absolutely. But the false memory syndrome seems to happen so often when the therapist conducting the regression actually steers the person in a certain direction, really gives very blatant suggestions, such as, is your father coming into the room right now to molest you? Well, I mean, that's a hugely leading suggestion, and that's definitely a no-no. But when that does happen in some people's regressions, then they try to sort of go along with it, like, oh, I guess my father is coming into the room right now, and they can easily confabulate or make up material to fit with whatever that suggestion was that the hypnotherapist gave. And of course, that's totally unfair and even not accurate. So any of us doing this
when someone's looking for a therapist to take them through the regression, now, granted you're in California, but there's 49 other states too.
Sure.
What would they look for in a potential therapist? Like, I live in Mississippi. It's not exactly a hot spot for abduction research. And I would anticipate a fair amount of difficulty in finding someone suitable for regression.
Well, you are absolutely right. And that's why this group, the Academy of Clinical Close Encounter Therapists, is so important, because we do have people who really are trained and open psychologically, philosophically, to work with this subject and to regress people. But you're totally right. Not only in Mississippi, but probably most places in the world, it would be very rare to find a therapist who is open to this whole subject matter, and also who would be trained well in conducting good regression therapy. So if a person in any location in the United States or other countries would like to find a professional therapist to explore these kinds of experiences that they think they've had, first of all, they might have to start calling around to therapists in their area. It's always best to work with somebody in person rather than over the telephone. I don't do regressions over the telephone myself, only in person. And then they might have to kind of interview that therapist and say, well, do you have any understanding of or openness to people being visited by very strange beings who seem to be from somewhere other than from the earth? And usually they can tell right away whether that therapist is open to that particular subject or not. And then, of course, you want to check with the therapist to see whether they do regression therapy and are they really well trained in doing that kind of hypnotic regression therapy. And so some people do have to call a number of different therapists, and they may or may not find somebody who's really suitable to work with. Fortunately, there are some other groups that help people find good resources for this kind of regression therapy. One of them is the OPUS group, the initials OPUS, and that's the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support. They're in the Bay Area of California, and they have a list of people also, therapists, who can work with this subject, and I think that they even have an online discussion group for people who do experience these kinds of encounters. So occasionally people can find resources. I know that many people find me on the internet. I don't know exactly what they type in to find me, but maybe hypnosis or regression or UFOs or extraterrestrial encounters or something like that, and they get to my website and then they contact me. So there are ways for people to do that. Another resource, too, is that most of the states in the U.S. have MUFONs. MUFON stands for Mutual UFO Network. And sometimes, at least, the people who run those MUFON groups have resources to suggest to people who ask for therapists who can help them with this sort of thing going on in their lives. So it's good for anybody listening who might want to find somebody in their particular area to work with on this kind of subject. If you have a local MUFON group, go to them, or you could always email me. I'll give my email address, which is Barbara, Barbara, then the underscore line, then Lamb, Lamb, at Verizon.net. And I can always give resources. It may referrals. It may take a little while for me to get back to the person sometimes, depending on how busy I am with other things, but I always do get back to the person as soon as I can. And so there is help out there. It's just difficult to find. But I have met so many experiencers, abductees, at different conferences where I speak, and different gatherings, MUFON groups, and so forth. And very often they want to find somebody to help them, but once they get the resource, they might wait a while, and I don't blame them. they might wait a while to sort of get up the courage, get up the nerve to approach the person they've been referred to. I mean, some people have known about my work, for instance, since the early 1990s. And even now, in the 2000s, or 2011 now, even now they might contact me and said, well, I've had your business card for about 15 years now, and I finally feel that I'm ready to really look into this. And I can really understand that, because anybody who's had these clues that something unusual like this has happened, very often they're curious, but on the other hand, they're a little afraid to know what they might find. Like how awful has it been? How mysterious, how earth-shaking might this be for me to know if these things have really happened? And yet, most people who are, getting ready or hoping to work with this eventually, they find that they have certain clues that have made them wonder anyway whether or not this sort of thing could be happening to them. And a whole bunch of different clues. Would you like to hear about those?
Sure.
Okay, so these are some of the really typical ones that people who experience extraterrestrial encounter might notice for themselves. A very typical one is what we call missing time. And that means that they might be awake and experiencing something like driving along on a road. Particularly it's kind of a remote road, but it even could happen on a major freeway or in a city. And they notice the time, and then they notice something peculiar happening. Light coming to the car from above or from above and to the side, and they wonder about that, and then the car motor might stop or come to a stop, and definitely slow down, and they'll pull off the road if possible, and then the car motor dies, and then the light is more there in the car and around the car, and they see some unusual beings, and then they usually don't remember anything after that. But then when they kind of come back into consciousness and awareness again, they might realize that it's an hour and a half later or 2 hours later than when this experience first began. And this can happen at night, too, that somebody could be sleeping and they wake up and they know, oh, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. And then the next thing they know, without having been asleep, the next thing they know, it might be 2 hours later. And they think, well, gee, that's weird. I wasn't asleep. I felt like something happened. I felt like I was somewhere else, but I can't remember what. But it is 2 hours later. So that's certainly one of the clues, that missing time. Sometimes people wake up and there are unusual markings on their body of various kinds, and they know they couldn't have put those markings on their body during night when they were asleep, and they'll wonder about that sort of thing. And sometimes people are just aware of seeing a very bright light or sparkles of light coming into the room toward them, particularly at night, and then they don't remember anything. Or they remember, for instance, watching television, sitting on the sofa, and they start to have very strange feelings like the energy around them has changed or everything has totally stopped. It seems like they're in a vacuum, and then they don't remember anything for a couple of hours, and they might still be on the couch knowing they didn't sleep, but something happened. Or maybe they even wake up in a different part of the house, like they've been removed and then put back in a different location in the house. Or sometimes people are aware of beginning an experience like this, and then they come to consciousness a couple of hours later, and they're actually outside the house. And frequently when this happens at night, all the doors are locked and the lights are turned off in the house, And here they are outside the house with all the doors locked, and they can't get in. Or sometimes they'll actually be returned to a totally different location in the same general area. So all of that's pretty distressing and pretty weird, but makes people think, well, gee whiz, something obviously happened, but I can't explain it. Or they might have very strong fears about a particular thing, like some people who experience this have very strong fears about needles, injection kind of needles. Or they might have strong fears about being in a place where there's a big, open, shiny floor, like a hospital or some airports. And that's because what they don't know yet is they did have some kind of unusual experience, a UFO craft, where there was a big, shiny floor. So some people won't even go to hospitals if they can possibly help it, or even go to airports, so those people just don't fly, because of these strong fears. Or they might have fears of all kinds of things. Being alone, driving alone on a deserted road, because maybe they've been abducted from one of those, or just being by themselves, or sleeping in a room without a light on, because they want to be sure to see what's happening if something begins to happen. Anyway, many, many different fears that people have, and when traced back through regression, we see that they were from these extraterrestrial encounters. And many people have flashbacks, too. This is another clue. In other words, they might suddenly, in the middle of a day doing anything, might suddenly see an alien face, a particular kind of alien face, or they might see an image of an instrument coming toward them. Just a quick little flash that will be very disturbing, or a flashback of being levitated through the air at night or daytime. And some people have dreams. At least they call them dreams because they were asleep in bed at night, and yet those dreams seem to be exceptionally vivid, exceptionally real, the kind of dream that they keep remembering in the next days and weeks and months or even years. And they remember because it was just so vibrant and so real seeming. And sometimes when we regress to the material of a particular dream like that, it certainly seemed out that there was much more to it than we were in the dream. And it certainly seems to the person like it wasn't a dream, it was an actual real event that happened to them. And there are other clues too, like sometimes people will wake up with their clothes on differently, for instance, being inside out now, or even upside down, or some people have awakened with somebody else's clothes on, and yet
somebody else's clothing on would be a little disturbing, I'm afraid.
It certainly would. It would. And in clothing they've never seen before. For instance, there's one person I know who was taken for one of these experiences and returned the next morning, and she woke up and she had a Japanese T-shirt on, with a Japanese label, not American Japanese style, but an actual Japanese T-shirt from Japan. And then she didn't know where her night clothes were, but she thought, oh, now, wait a minute, I don't know anybody who has a T-shirt like this, and how would it have come on my body during the night? So there were things like that. And then also said waking up in a different part of the bed or the room or the house or outside or down the road. Or one man I know, when he was a teenager, he was at a party, and then he went home, and he was abducted during the night, and the next morning he woke up in his friend's basement of his friend's house, which was about a mile away. from his house, even though he'd gone to sleep at his own house. And, that's obviously extremely perplexing and rather bothering. So when he came up from the basement in that house and he happened to be nude, he'd been returned without his clothes, and he walked up the stairs, and the door to the basement entered into the kitchen where his friend's mother was. He didn't know where he was for a while, and then when he went upstairs, he said, "Oh my goodness, I'm in my friend's house," and of course was very embarrassed and couldn't explain it, nor could the woman or the friend. But very interesting things of that nature seem to happen. So there are many others of them. And then, sometimes people just notice they have a particular fear. Like some people will see a picture of an extraterrestrial, like, for instance, a gray alien, and pictures of gray aliens are in many, many places in this culture. And they might see it on a book cover, like Whitley Strieber's book called Communion, which has an extraterrestrial on the cover. And that one face has triggered quite a number of people that I actually know to thinking, whoa, oh my gosh, that's familiar. I've seen that kind of being before. And that will start bringing up little clues and memories and certainly get their attention. Some people are triggered if they watch a television show about this subject. And maybe they wouldn't have thought a whole lot about it before, but when watching this show about other people being abducted or about extraterrestrials, something will kind of click, and they'll think, oh, yeah, I've seen that too. Oh my gosh. And then they might start remembering, at least remembering some of it. So people, can really get kind of stimulated sometimes into remembering things that they didn't put together before. A lot of little hints and bits and pieces and clues kind of rush in, and it begins to add up to a picture. And after a while, after sort of brewing on that for a while, they think, I think I really need to look into this. A great example of this is one lovely young woman whom I worked with a few years ago. She just couldn't understand why she had such a hugely strong traumatic response to seeing that extraterrestrial on the cover of Whitley Strieber's book, Communion. Mm-hmm. And she'd gone into a bookstore, this was back in the 1990s, which she went into a bookstore to buy a cookbook, and she found a couple of books and took them up to the counter to pay for them, and there, on a little stand on the counter, was the cover of Whitley Strieber's book, and she looked over and she saw this alien there, and she went, oh! And she was terrified, absolutely terrified, dropped the cookbooks, ran out of the store, and couldn't get herself to go back in for another couple of weeks to buy those cookbooks. And when she went in that second time, she went to pay for the books, and there again was Whitley Strieber's book being promoted with the alien on the cover, and she looked at it again, and she just felt shocked and terrible and repulsed and sickened, and again left the books there and ran out of the store. Well, finally, a couple of weeks after that, she said, you know what, I'm just going to have to buy those cookbooks and not look at anything else on the counter. So she went in again, and there, sure enough, moved a little bit further away, but still was that book cover. And this time she said, okay, I really ought to know what it is about this that is freaking me out so much. So she actually bought the book, Communion, took it home, put it by her bed on the bedside table, face down, and it took her a couple of months at least before she could pick up the book and start reading it. And when she read it, she thought, oh my goodness, this is so familiar to me, some of the things in the book, and I really need to know if anything like this has happened to me, because I'm so affected by this. So that's what she came in for, basically. And so the focus for that particular regression was, what was the real source of that extreme fear and strong reaction she had to seeing the alien on the cover of that book? And it was turned out to be a very wonderful regression. We never know ahead of time what's going to come up. I don't know, and the person doesn't know. Anyway, in that regression, she found herself back at age 4, and she was playing in her living room one afternoon, and her mother had gone to the neighbor's house next door, just for a few minutes, which sometimes stretches on to be longer than you think, to take a birthday cake to the neighbor next door, leaving the little girl at home. And while the mother was gone, a being, an extraterrestrial being, a tall, thin being, came into the living room where the little girl was, and said, "We take you away sometimes, and we check you physically. We make sure you're all right. And if there's something not all right physically, we heal it. We take care of you. We're teaching you various things. And the reason I'm here today," the alien said, "is to keep encouraging you to help people on Earth to understand about not being cruel to animals. Because so many people do horrible things to animals and abandon them and torture them and leave them and do research on them, operations on them, and so forth. And that's very cruel, and we respect all life on Earth. And we want you, being one of our people we work with, we want you to help humans understand to be good to animals and not to be unkind to them in any way." And as it turns out, when this young woman came to me in the first place, she told me about her life and her work as a 32-year-old, which she was at the time. And for years she had actually had been a very strong advocate for animal rights and anti-vivisection procedures, and had done a tremendous amount of volunteer work to get the word out to people about saving animals and being kind to them, rescuing animals, and not experimenting on them. So it really made sense to her when she found that out in the regression. And it also made sense to her, that she had experiences with alien beings, but she had developed this huge fear. And in this case, she really didn't need to have that fear, because she was having very benign and even helpful experiences with the beings who were coming and taking her here and there. Mm-hmm. So, but every story, every regression is so fascinating, very fascinating. Done, at least 2,000 regressions since 1991 to this type of subject matter, and it's been about 760 different individuals now that I've regressed. That's a lot of material, and I think it's important to say that there are many, many different kinds of extraterrestrial beings who come, very different species, it certainly seems, no doubt from different locations in the cosmos, and that the experiences that people have are quite varied as well. We tend to hear, mostly because of the public media, we tend to hear about the little gray aliens and the things that they do. And yes, they do, and many, many of my experiencer clients have had experiences with them. But they also have experiences with other types as well. And there's a whole bunch of different types of beings that seem to come and interact with people. And they can also have different types of experiences. Like they can have experiences that they think are very, very positive and even enlightening and uplifting. And they can, with certain other beings, have experiences that they do not like being put on a medical table and kind of probed, and samples are taken from them of hair and tissue and blood and so forth, various fluids. And, that's not fun, and nobody seems to be explaining while they're doing it. At least here on Doctors, we might like what doctors do, but at least usually the doctor or the parent will explain why the doctor is doing such and such. But very often with these beings, they don't get any explanation unless during the experience they ask. And this is something I've experimented with many people. Why are you doing this to me? I tell the client, you can ask the beings while they're doing something, why are you doing this to me? And in almost every case, they do get an answer, and the answer makes sense. They get an answer from those beings. Now, of course, in the light of day, we can...
Yeah, see, I seem to have gotten answers that didn't really fill in. Like on one occasion I asked, why are you doing this to me? And their answer was to change you. I'm like, change me what? I mean, am I going to sprout horns, get scales, what? I never did get an answer.
Mm-hmm.
To change me. That didn't tell me anything.
No, that gives you one little piece of it, but what kind of change, and why are you doing this? And
yeah, I mean, it involved injections, and logic said that I was getting an injection for a reason to change something, but what are you changing?
Yeah.
I never did get a response on that.
I know it. Well, some of my people will ask further if they get a very short answer like that, like, well, what do you mean, or what kind of change? And it just seems that in these regressions, most of the beings, not every single one, but most of them will give an answer that is enough of an answer, that really helps the person experiencing this to understand. So that's very interesting. And now some of these experiences seem to be happening completely in the person's physical body. And some experiences seem to be happening with the astral body. In other words, the conscious part of the person, the soul, but leaving the body at home. And so out-of-body kinds of experiences. And seems like it seems like most of the physical experience, well, let me say it a different way around. It seems that most of the medical examinations and pokings and probings and samples and putting implants in people, that's a very common thing for extraterrestrials to do with the people they take for these visits. But they seem to be happening, as far as we can tell, with the entire physical body of the person. But then it seems like some of the astral or just consciousness experiences might be involved more with being taken way out in space, or being taken to cities with crystal lights, like some people get taken to, which are beautiful and sparkling and lovely to visit, or being taken into other dimensions, it seems, where everyone else there, other types of beings, are more ethereal, even kind of semi-transparent or transparent, and yet very, very conscious and aware. And the person is very aware, too, of all the details of that experience. So it seems like some people are taken astrally and some people are taken physically. And one person might experience one kind of experience on one occasion and the other type of experience on another occasion. So some people regard their experiences as very positive and wonderful and helpful and enlightening, educational, and but that same person could even experience other experiences. Oh, that was negative, I didn't like it, or it was painful, or I felt like I was sort of trapped, or a kind of a prisoner briefly. But people can have those same types of experiences even in one single encounter, which is kind of interesting. Mm-hmm.
Well, I know that I've had both non-physical as well as physical contact experiences, but at this point we do need to hang on to these thoughts. Folks, it is time for us to take a break. While we're away from your computer, check out our website, www.exogenynetwork.com. Stay tuned, and the Dawn of Shades will return with our guest, Barbara Lamb, and more about our topics tonight in just a few minutes.
Living my life in a slow hell. Different girl every night at the hotel. I ain't seen the sun shine in 3 damn days. Been fueling up on cocaine and whiskey. Wish I
Welcome back to the Dawn of Shades. I'm your host, Gia Scott, with our guest, Barbara Lamb. And once again, I would like to remind everyone to visit our website, www.exogenynetwork.com. You can sign up for the newsletter, wander around and explore the website, and let me know what you think of it. There are links there to take you to blogs, Twitter, and even Facebook. If you want to go straight to my blog and see what I'm up to, you can go to giascott.wordpress.com, and it's all right there. I also want to remind everyone that our Women in Ufology series continues through the month of May. We have one more guest and a great panel program planned. The topic of Women in Ufology is a fascinating one. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can email it to me at giascott@exogenynetwork.com, and I can pass it on from there. If you're listening in on a podcast or think of it after the program is finished, go ahead and send it to me anyhow. I'll do my best to get your question answered. If you're in the virtual auditorium, you can put it into text there, and I'm trying very hard to catch it as the screen scrolls. And if you want to call in, our call-in number is 504-273-7379. Now, Barbara, we talked briefly about a question that did come through the virtual auditorium, and that question was if a spiritual emergency has any connection with ET or the paranormal.
Well, spiritual emergency is a very, very interesting set of things for someone to experience. As I understand it, spiritual emergency has to do primarily with the raising of the Kundalini energy up the spine and through the top of the head in a person who has been is spiritually growing and learning and advancing and probably practicing spiritual practices such as meditation. And the Kundalini rising can be quite traumatic, and particularly if a person doesn't know about it, and here suddenly is this enormous surge of energy coming up the spinal cord from the base of the spine and then out through the top of the head, the crown chakra. And it can be very highly charged. It can be burning. It can be painful. It can also be highly energetic in a very exciting way. It can be thrilling. It can be enthralling. It can be enlightening. In any event, it can be very, very confusing for the person, and the person can feel very disoriented about that unless they already know a lot about it and have a guide to help with them. There actually is a group to help people with spiritual emergencies, and I know that the work early on, back in the 1960s, done about this was by Stanislav Grof, medical doctor, psychiatrist, and his wife, Christina Grof. They've done a lot of this spiritual emergency work, and I think that they even have an association, well, I know they used to, I think they still do, an association of people trained to help with this sort of thing. So that is different than extraterrestrial encounters or abductions, because the abductions don't have anything to do with this spiritual energy rising up through the spine and bursting out the top of the head. It's, where these other beings actually come and remove people, take them usually to a craft, it seems, for whatever the experiences are, and then returns them to, or very close to, the person that they've been the place that they've been removed from. So it's quite a different phenomenon. And what was the third part of this, the questioner asked?
Or with paranormal.
Oh, paranormal. Well, I think that we could say that the extraterrestrial encounter part is considered part of the broad umbrella of paranormal activities. It does have paranormal aspects to it in that they're not the regular physical everyday things that we experience, and that sometimes the people are taken by other dimensional beings to other dimensional, that is non-physical, locations during these encounters. And paranormal includes all kinds of things like spirit visitations, spirit guides, channeling, psychic skills, poltergeists. There are many things like that included in that whole topic of the paranormal. Now,
paranormal is almost a catch-all bin.
Yes.
If it's outside of the normal experience, it fits in there.
That's right. So paranormal, I believe, means, partly or away from normal, paranormal. And so out-of-the-body experiences, which many, many people have anyway, totally aside from the extraterrestrial encounters, out-of-body experiences would be included in that paranormal umbrella, shall we say. So even this Kundalini rising and the spiritual emergency could possibly fit under that umbrella of the paranormal as well. So I hope that answers the question for that person.
I hope so, too. I did have another question come in via email. Have you ever had a regression include information about military personnel being present during the experience?
Oh, good question. And that's something that I tend not to introduce in talking about this. But yes, indeed, I've had quite a number of clients who are taken by extraterrestrials on probably most of those encounters. And sometimes, in addition to that, they're taken from their homes or cars or wherever by people, not extraterrestrials, but people, and very often those people seem to be dressed as if they are military people. We don't really know if they're military or governmental, but anyway, they seem to be perfectly human, And in those cases, they typically are taken to some kind of remote underground facility. And in that underground facility are other of these military-looking people, and who might examine the person. They might do various experiments with them. They might try to test them for their paranormal skills. They might try to see how psychic they are, what kind of psychic skills. For instance, one of my people was tested to see how well she could move things with her mind, which was something that extraterrestrials had previously been teaching her over a period of years. They sometimes want to find out what this person knows about extraterrestrials from their encounter experiences, and many of these people who are taken for this kind of experience see not only these military-looking humans, but extraterrestrials there working with them in the same facility, which seems to be underground. So there seems to be, from what we can tell from this, some kind of cooperative program going on between some extraterrestrials and some humans who seem to be organized in that sort of structural or military type of way. So yes, that does happen, and it's interesting to me that the people I've worked with who've had both of these kinds of encounters, they usually feel much more angry and disgusted and fearful of the human abductions of this type, rather than the extraterrestrials, rather than those encounters. They may not be happy with any of these encounters, but they certainly feel much worse about human beings doing this to their fellow human beings. Now, I want to sort of balance that, too. I'm sounding very negative, I realize. And there's good cause for that in many cases, but some people who experience extraterrestrial encounters are really quite thrilled and pleased about these encounters, and they seem to be meeting up with beings who are very enlightened and very positive, and sometimes they get healed by these kinds of extraterrestrial beings. And sometimes they get taken to what they call beyond the veil, into more highly spiritual dimensions than our physical dimension. And they feel unconditional love from some of those beings. And many of them feel really sad and even cry when they're returned to Earth, because they don't want to have to leave that love and those wonderful beings who seem to be so caring for them. And it's just great when these experiencers get healed by some of the extraterrestrials. And sometimes they get told by the extraterrestrials that, and this is during a physical examination, they're told that there's something wrong with a particular system of theirs, or like, let's say, their liver or their organ or the gallbladder or something. And they're warned to go to an Earth doctor and get a really good thorough checkup and get that taken care of. And when the person comes back to Earth and does go to the doctor to check that out, they always find that the extraterrestrials were correct, that they really do have that kind of problem, which needs definite medical attention. And then, but even more than that, I've had so many people who find out in regression that they've been healed of really even some very serious conditions by the extraterrestrials who work with them. Even cancer, colon cancer and breast cancer and heart problems and very serious conditions like that. And sometimes people realize that, oh, they were terribly, terribly sick, and now suddenly, after an encounter, they seem to be completely well. And they can attribute it only to what happened in the encounter with the extraterrestrials. So you see, there are plenty of reasons why some people really like at least some of these encounters with some of these beings. And many people, in any event, are educated on a craft by extraterrestrials. That many of them report in their regressions that they're taken to some kind of a school, classroom. Sometimes they describe it more as a library, even though it really doesn't have books in it, or a temple of learning. Or one extraterrestrial explained during the regression that it's really a web, almost like a network of learning that isn't really specifically a physical place. But anyway, in that learning environment, however the person pictures it, they are usually sat at some sort of like a computer sort of arrangement. We don't know if it really is a computer, but it kind of looks like one. And they just touch the screen, and then they learn whatever it is that they were brought there to learn on that particular occasion. And in that learning environment, there's always a series of mentors who help these people, and it seems like each person who's taken to this sort of a learning situation has his or her own mentor. And from what I can see with people I've worked with for, say, 15 or 20 years, that they continue to see that mentor on very frequent occasions, taken to this educational...
In my case, that mentor has been with me since I was like 11 or 12 years old, and I just turned 50. So
okay.
He's been around a while.
Well,
he's very familiar.
And that being, too, might have been there earlier. For instance, I've worked with quite a few people, more than a few really, who started meeting with their mentor way, way back when they were maybe age 2 or 3. And children tend to look very fondly at this when they remember it, through the regressions particularly, that they are taken, even as very, very young children, to what is probably a craft, and they're seated on a floor with other abducted human children, and sometimes with some alien children or hybrid children, and they are taught various things, particularly how to do unusual things with their minds, such as being able to read each other's thoughts and have their own thoughts read, and moving things with their minds, starting with very lightweight objects like a feather, and then maybe a light piece of tissue paper, and then a thicker piece of paper, and then a paper clip, and so on through the years of childhood, until they can perfect actually moving a ball, like rolling a ball, by touching it only with their minds and not with their hands. And they play all kinds of psychic games and learn many, many psychic skills that translate into their lives. And 2 little children whom I used to work with when they were, the little girl was about 3.5 years old, and her cousin, a little boy, was about 4.5 years old, and they were taken together sometimes, picked up at their own houses, by the same extraterrestrials, whom they absolutely loved, by the way, and they were trained to do many things, including physical healing. So one day when these children were having lunch with the mother of the little boy, and she cut her hand very, very badly with a paring knife, and it was gushing blood and everything, and the 2 little kids jumped off their lunch stools and stood in front of the mother a few feet away and started doing these movements which looked to the mother to be similar to Tai Chi or Qigong type of movements. And the little girl and the little boy did exactly the same kind of movements, and while they were doing it, the mother could feel all this heat and energy coming from their hands to the cut in her hand. And within just a couple of minutes of the children doing this, she could see the blood stop and the cut close up and already begin to form that tissue into a scar. And it just kept on healing after that. And she said, how did you know how to do that? And they said, oh, our space friends have been teaching us that. And it's wonderful that we can use it now. And I mean, this is a real happening. And so that's just one of many examples of children even, and adults as well, learning these wonderful healing skills, which they can learn back here on Earth. So it's
in my own case, though, my mentor arrived at that 11, 12-year-old age. There was like a change going on. And it was a classic case of good cop, bad cop, which I know as an adult, but as a 11 or 12-year-old child, I didn't have a clue. And one was a really, really, I mean, they're both ugly. Okay, by human standards, aliens are ugly. They really are horrible looking.
Well, that's right.
And one had glowing red eyes and looked like everything the preachers had been hollering about at church, and he had to be a demon. Obviously, I'm terrified of him. The other guy's pretty ugly, but, at least he doesn't look like what the preacher's been telling him, come and get me anyhow.
Right.
And he made this, the big ugly guy made the demonic-looking one go away. Therefore, of course, he's a good guy, right?
Well, sure, he's a good cop.
Yeah, I mean, he made the really scary one go away.
Yeah.
And that was how this relationship was established and a level of trust initially. Mm-hmm. Like I said, now I recognize it as what it was. Mm-hmm. They were probably both aliens, and they both were in on it, and, they figured, okay, whichever one scared me worse would go away.
That's right, for a break.
Yeah, and in my case, it was the big guy that stayed, and the one with the red eyes went away. Because to me, the red eyes did. It sounded just like everything the preachers had been hollering about that was going to come and get me.
Oh, sure.
Showed up in my bedroom,
I know. Yeah. Well, of course, that's scary. And, let's just take a look at this from a different perspective. Have you ever particularly really thought about how we humans must look to those extraterrestrials?
Oh, I'm sure we look as goofy to them. I have to admit, I'm one of those people that has this mental block. When people talk about reptoids and insectoids and greys and reptilians and Pleiadians and, so forth and so on, the list goes on. I call it the 101 flavors of aliens. I don't see any difference between them. Now, I can recognize the humanoid ones, obviously, because they can walk down the street and not be noticed.
Right.
But the rest of them are just varying degrees of ugly with different sizes. I mean, there's really, really ugly and really, really big, and then there's not very big and pretty darn ugly, and everything in between. To me, as far as I know, they're all the same. They're all aliens, right?
Well,
I don't get
they're all
the difference.
Aliens, yeah. But it really seems, I've given an awful lot of thought to this over these 21 years or so. It seems that from my point of view and the point of view of the people I work with too, that there really are different types, different races, shall we say, or species of beings. And they're all extraterrestrial. We could say that. They're not here, and as far as we know, but they live elsewhere. But and even in other dimensions, I've said. But there really is a big difference between the short gray beings and even the taller gray beings who don't seem to be as sort of worker bee or robot-like. And then there are medium-sized brown bronze color beings, sort of brownish bronze. And there are blue silvery beings. Some of those are pretty small too, but they act so different than the little gray beings. And there are definitely seem to be a whole other species of what we call reptilian beings, and quite a variation within that big grouping too, some of them being more aquatic, seeming to live under the ocean or in the ocean, And some of them are more almost dragon-like without all the length of a dragon. And some are very buff and strong and look like Earth football players, except that they've got this different kind of head and face and different eyes. You often have a vertical type of slit in the eyes. And then, of course, their skin texture is much more reptilian than ours is. And they seem to do a whole variety of different things with humans. And then there's the insectoid types, the mantis beings. And they look extremely different. They're very tall, sometimes 7, 8, or 9 feet tall. And sometimes they're pure white. Once in a while there's a green one. They have huge black eyes, much bigger than the little gray's eyes. And they're so big that they seem to almost curve around the sides of the head. And they have really long, thin arms and legs. They are described very often as looking like a praying mantis type of being. And they, of course, if you just suddenly saw one of those with you, you'd think, oh, God, how scary. But they turn out, from anybody I've regressed to encounters with them, they turned out to be very kindly, very gentle, very patient. They take people to wonderful experiences. They're unconditionally loving. And even in the case of one woman I worked with many, many times, and she had lots of encounters with the insectoid types as well as other types, but when she was with these insectoid types, he was always so kind and loving with her. She really grew to get over her distaste from the way he looked and trust that he was really wonderful. And one time he took her and her little 3-year-old granddaughter, who was staying with her at the time, and took them both out there and actually played on what seemed to be like some great big giant platform out in space, not even in a craft, and played in a very gentle, sweet way with the little girl. And I mean, that was just amazing. But anyway, I personally just don't think they can be connected or likened to the reptilians or any of the grays. And then there are the Nordic types, we call them, but they look very human, rather like Scandinavian people. They're tall and very attractive, very well built. They have full heads of hair. They're muscular. Usually have blue eyes, and which are very bright and very intense looking. And they're very kindly. They're loving to these people. Sometimes they educate them too and take them to very positive experiences. And then there's some small types who look, people describe them, well, they're not really small, but smaller than some of the others, which people describe as bug-like. They look like some type of ant even, or bug. And then there are very ethereal types, seem to be like kind of wavery, shimmering spiritual beings. And they take them to wonderful sort of spiritual type of experiences. There also are 3 of my people, unbeknownst to each other, experienced being taken by an insectoid or one of the other beings way out in space, it seemed, and then into a giant form which reminded the person of looking like an amoeba, you know, that kind of undulated and shrank and expanded and wavered around in space. And this big amoeba-looking being was sort of semi-transparent, as if the person approaching this being could kind of see a suggestion of veins and texture inside. And the colors of these beings were beautiful too, kind of blue, lavender, purple, turquoise, and the colors seem to sort of undulate too. And for these few people who've had this experience that came out in regressions, once they were inside the sort of amoeba thing, which they might have been scared about first, like we might be if we suddenly thought we were going to enter a giant jellyfish. In fact, they remind people to some extent of jellyfish without the tentacles. But once they're inside the being, they suddenly are clairsentient. They seem to know everything about everything, and they feel totally regarded wonderfully. They feel unconditionally loved, totally received and honored, and it's just the most glorious experience. And then after a while, the being has them come out of that amoeba-like being and brings them back to wherever they were taken from. And the person feels totally enlightened and spiritually expanded and, with this remaining feeling of being profoundly, unconditionally loved. So I would say that that's a very different type of extraterrestrial being than the little grays or many of the other types. There are people, too, who have actually seen tall, white beings out in the desert, out where we have some of our secret or less known installations. And
Charles White, I've heard him talk about them.
Charles Hall, I think. Yeah, Charles Hall talks about the tall white.
Charles Hall,
Yeah. And so I've had other people in their regressions meet with very tall, white, tall, thin, pure white beings. I don't know if those are the same types that Charles Hall met on many occasions out there in the desert in California. But anyway, they're tall white beings, and they tend to be wonderful teachers and mentors for the people who are taken to be with them. So it's wonderful, I think, for people to know that these extraterrestrial beings are not all creepy and ugly and frightening and mean and nasty. Some of them can certainly come across that way, I will say. But there are these other really wonderful beings that people want to have more encounters with. They want to see them again. And sometimes, if those people ask to see them again, and ask it enough, and ask it sincerely enough, and ask it out loud, sometimes they will actually be taken to see some of those beings again. And you've probably been aware of this too, Gia, that there are people who very frequently, all of their life, go outside and look up at the sky and say to the sky, I want to be out there. I want to be with you. I want to be in my own true home, which is out there somewhere in the universe. And my own true home isn't here on Earth with this family I was born to. These are not my true father and mother. And, of course, the parents don't really like hearing that, as you can imagine.
No, and I do know some people that do feel that way.
Yes, I do too. I know many of them, in fact. And so sometimes the regressions can show them, why they feel that way. Where did that really originally come from? And that's very helpful for these people, because so many people on Earth seem to be descended from, or I should say reincarnated from, those beings out there that they somehow vaguely remember and know are theirs. They know they came from them somehow, and they want to reconnect with them. So this brings up the subject, of course, about previous lifetimes. And many people I've worked with have found out in regression that in a previous lifetime, they were the same race as the type of beings who frequently come and interact with them now on Earth. in a previous lifetime they were one of those beings. In fact, with one client, we went back to a lifetime many, many lifetimes ago when she was an extraterrestrial on a different planet, and she found life after many incarnations of that type, found life, kind of humdrum and boring, and in one of those lifetimes, she met some beings from another planet who seemed to be very different. They seemed to be very, very interested in consciousness and how they could develop consciousness and how they could heal people, heal each other, and heal people whom they would abduct. And she decided between lifetimes that she would like to be one of those for a few lifetimes. So she incarnated as one of that second group, and then we traced about 4 different lifetimes as one of those beings, all extremely interesting and definitely more advanced than we humans are in many ways. And we finally stopped pursuing the whole consciousness subject when in one of those regressions she found that she was being trained to have total shared consciousness with the other beings of that type. In other words, sort of a group mind, or some people might say a hive mentality, except it was much more enlightened than just a hive mentality. And she could get to all the other levels of consciousness with those beings, but she couldn't quite get into it. Then we found out in regressions that she was trained to work physically, along with the other beings of that type, on abducted human beings. So there she'd find herself in a regression, standing at a table side, a medical table on a craft, with these other beings around her, and that she had been trained and was helping them to do energy work on this abducted human man who seemed to be out of consciousness. And they were working with what they called the energy code point of that abducted human man. Well, as it turns out, before this woman started doing her series of probably 15 or 16 regressions with me, before that, and without really knowing that she was experiencing these extraterrestrial encounters, she just had hints of them, she had already left her corporate job as a manager and was doing professional massage work and was learning healing skills here on Earth. And then when it came out in the regression subsequently that she'd been trained to do healing by these other beings when she was one of them, and, it all really made sense that this was the direction that she really needed to follow in this life. And she's still doing that work, and I'm sure very, very effectively, hands-on healing and consciousness.
With all the cases that you've worked with, you've seen a lot of people telling their story, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
In all of this, has the reason for their continued contact with humans here on this planet, has it ever shown itself?
Oh, I don't quite know what you mean, but what has shown itself?
Why are they coming here? Why are they abducting people? Why bother?
Well, there are many different reasons given by these different groups of extraterrestrials. And now one of the biggest ones, and we do, of course, have to mention this, is the reproductive program that some of these extraterrestrial species do. The Greys do a lot of it, and the reptilians do a lot of it as well. We hear more about the Gray aliens doing it, where they combine reproductively in a variety of ways with human beings to create hybrid children. And so the children is half extraterrestrial and half human. And many of those children are not human enough, at least at the beginning of this process. They're not human enough to live here. They have to live on the ships, the crafts, with these other beings. And but then it's a very long-term program, apparently, of this kind of hybridization. So some of those, what we call early stage hybrids, then will be combined with another human, and that offspring, you see, will be a little bit more human. And that hybrid then will be combined, because years go by and they get mature enough to do this, combined with yet another human, and that offspring is even more human. So we've got the early stage hybrids whom we don't see unless we're taken to the craft and see them on the craft. And then there are middle stage hybrids, combine more and more with human genetics and reproductive material. And those middle stage hybrids are usually up and around and doing a lot more, even assisting some of the other beings on the craft. And they can look somewhat human and can be fairly much a normal human size. But they usually wouldn't come here, or if they did, just for a very brief time. They probably wouldn't be able to actually live here. And then there are what we call the late stage hybrids, and these would be after quite a number of generations of an extraterrestrial combining with a human, and then another human, down through these generations, so that by now they look very human and can live here and live here amongst us and not be detected as being anything really different. And generally speaking, they are extremely attractive people. I know some of them personally. I've realized in the last few months that, wow, they're not only experiencers, but they are hybrids, very, very high-level, late-stage hybrids. And they could even have children here. They would probably combine with a human, and so that would make that offspring even more human, but still with some of the extraterrestrial DNA in there. And then there's another thing that happens, that along with this, many women are pregnant with their own husband, human husband, and during the pregnancy, if they're already an experiencer of extraterrestrial contact, they are at one point taken, put on a medical table on the craft, and an extraterrestrial, usually seems to be a female, will feel around the abdomen, feel where the baby is in the mother's womb through the abdomen, and then give an injection of extraterrestrial DNA into that fetus growing in the womb, so that that fetus then comes to full term here on Earth and is born to the mother in the regular way and grows up here, but with quite a good dose of the extraterrestrial genetics in that person. And then, of course, if that person grows up and combines with another human, as you can see, through the generations, they get to be more and more human-like. So the typical way of doing this reproductive program has been to abduct a woman, human woman, take eggs from her ovaries, and then return her, and then they combine those eggs with alien DNA in a petri dish kind of setup, and then when that's thoroughly mixed and looks like it's going to be a good conception, it's going to be viable for living, they will take the woman again from Earth and implant this into her uterus, and she will be therefore pregnant. and she will have that pregnancy confirmed by a medical doctor, and she will carry that embryo for 1.5 to 2.5 or maybe 3 months, and then she's taken again, and this little embryo is removed and put into a tank of special fluid on the craft and gestated in that craft until full term, when that baby is taken out of the craft and raised there with the extraterrestrials. Now, of course, you might wonder, what about this woman to whom this has happened? She's pregnant. It was confirmed by her doctor. And then suddenly one day she realizes that she doesn't feel pregnant anymore. And she'll go to the doctor and he'll confirm that, well, that's strange. It's unusual, but you were pregnant, but you're not pregnant now. And if she says, well, how could that be, not remembering all these other things that have happened in the encounters, he will say things, well, sometimes the embryo will, in the first 3 months, will just pull away from the wall of the uterus and be absorbed into the system. And
yes, many people have heard that.
Yeah, and I mean, that could happen anyway without any extraterrestrial intervention.
Without extraterrestrial intervention, that could happen. And that's typically, it was a spontaneous abortion. It was reabsorbed by the uterus. We made a mistake. There's margin of error.
Yep, all those things are said. But in the kind of situation we're talking about, this embryo was actually removed. Now,
right.
When the baby... Oh, and by the way, when they do the removal, these extraterrestrials seem to be really skilled at doing this sort of thing, and they will scrape the inside of the uterus like a good abortion doctor would do. So there's no, damage or messiness to the uterus, and the doctor will sometimes admire that. Well, my goodness. I mean, sometimes we'll accuse the person of having had a miscarriage or an abortion, and the woman will say, no, I didn't. I would have been aware of a miscarriage, and I definitely didn't go and have an abortion. So it's one of those mysteries until the whole picture begins to fill in for that woman. So anyway, this whole thing about hybrids is one of the main reasons why some of these species do have these encounters with human beings. But some of the beings, the extraterrestrials, do not seem to do the reproductive projects at all. And they are here, some of them, to really just simply learn about human beings in every way they can, really study us, see how we work psychologically, emotionally, mentally, physically, reproductively, but not expect to have children with us. And some seem to be definitely here for enlightening us and teaching us, as I have said. So, there are just a lot of different agendas from these different beings. But overall, it seems like all of these beings have one time or other told the people whom I've done regressions with that they are very concerned about planet Earth. They're very concerned about the way that we're treating the Earth and polluting it and polluting the air and adding toxins to all of our life forms, and they're very concerned about our nuclear proliferation for sure. And they think that we're really in the process of ruining the Earth, and what a shame that would be, because Earth, according to some of them, has more species, more billions of species and subspecies and resources of all kinds than any other planet in the cosmos. That has been said by several different groups of beings to my experiencers. and they're very concerned about the continuation of the human race. So one of the reasons they give for creating hybrid beings is so that if human beings totally devastate the earth and ruin our ability to live on earth, that at least something of human beings...
Your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number.
Some of the beings who, are combined with the extraterrestrial material would be able to live on the crafts or would be able to live on other planets. So this is really like a giant rescue mission, according to these beings. And can you hear me now? I know we had an interruption. So I can't hear you, but I'm going to keep talking just in case we're still on the air. So some of these hybrids seem to be...
Yes, now I'm back. Sorry, Barbara, but I was...
Okay. Yes, so I was saying that some of these beings seem to be very, very caring about humanity and want humanity to be able to exist and to live. And the only way to do that, if they had to live elsewhere other than the Earth, would be to be combined with the extraterrestrial genetics so that they could survive in those other environments. So there are some beliefs among some people, and I underline the word belief, that extraterrestrials are doing hybridization so that they can have their own beings mixed with ours, able to live on Earth and take over the Earth. I have a very different take on that from the many people I've worked with, is that they're combining these humans and extraterrestrials, human enough to live here, so that we can upgrade humanity and help other human beings to be, much more ecologically conscious and treat the earth and the oceans and the air much, much better than we do, and to help people to spiritually evolve. So that's, I think, a wonderful...
It would be very, very nice, but what has happened to us, Barbara, in addition to me getting briefly disconnected, but we have run out of time once again.
Oh, okay. Yes,
you have been a fantastic guest tonight, and I want to thank you very much for joining us. Folks, I have enjoyed the program with Barbara tonight. I hope all of you have as well, and that you found that it provided all of you with plenty of food for thought and more illumination for your personal journey towards truth. Join us again next Tuesday, and we'll bring you along for another episode of The Dawn of Shades as we continue with our Women in Ufology series with an entire panel of the women of ufology, and it's sure to be another fascinating conversation as well. With that, we are out of time. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and good night.
Good night.
Hate